Hey, it's Jordan. I am here with Jennifer Wickham. You are in British Columbia, Canada, and you are, I hope I don't screw this up, member of Wet'suwet'en tribe. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. And honestly, I wish I could get up there because it really, the energy I'm seeing in British Columbia in native territory is not so different than what I saw when I was first at Standing Rock. For those who don't
Mhm.
know what's going on, um, TransCanada, who is the Keystone Pipeline's father, is now trying to ram through a natural gas pipeline through Wet'suwet'en territory in British Columbia. There's been a camp out there for many years, but now it's
Mhm.
escalated. Can you kind of talk about what's been going on there the last few weeks and months?
Right. So Coastal GasLink um, applied for an injunction against the Unist'ot'en, who, like you said, have been um, holding it down against the industry for almost a decade. And they are a house group of one of the five clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And Coastal GasLink was granted an interim injunction on December 14th. And when that happened, because all five clans have supported the Unist'ot'en in all these years that they've been doing the work out on the territory. And so the chiefs decided that they wanted to show their support. And it was decided because Gidimt'en clan is right next door to Unist'ot'en, so you have to go through Gidimt'en territory to get to the Unist'ot'en, um, that we would put up a access checkpoint. So we're controlling access to Gidimt'en territory. And so we held a smoke feast in our feast hall, which is part of our traditional governance system. So it's kind of like the parliament for our nation. It's where all our decisions are made and ratified and made into law. And so we held a feast on December 16th, and on December 17th, sorry, is when we started controlling access to Gidimt'en territory. And so Coastal GasLink tried to come out to post their interim injunction at Unist'ot'en at the bridge, and they did not pass protocol. So we are enacting free, prior, and informed consent protocol to access our territory. They didn't pass. The chiefs did not give them permission, and so they applied to amend their interim injunction. They had a hearing before the court on December 21st, and they were granted the amendment. So it included, they had it expanded to include the territory, to include all territory past the 27-kilometer mark on the road, the Forest Service Road out towards Unist'ot'en. So that would include Gidimt'en territory as well. And so there's a lot of things sort of leading up to that and surrounding that. But basically, um, they didn't file the amended injunction until January 4th with the courts. And so the chiefs had a meeting with the Aboriginal liaison RCMP officers on January 4th.
And just so people
That,
know, RCMP is the police there.
yeah,
Hmm.
correct. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And so we had a meeting with them, and they told us that the amended injunction would be enforceable um, after it was signed. As soon as they had a signed copy, they did not have a signed copy at that point. Um, and so they had planned a meeting with, because they weren't able to give us any information on when they were going to enforce it, what that was going to look like, kind of what was going to happen during the enforcement. So we had been told this entire time that Coastal GasLink representatives would come to clear access. So basically it would be CGL employees that would come and take down any gates or impediments leading into Gitumden territory or Unist'ot'en territory. They also told, so the lead Aboriginal liaison officer, Ben Smith, he has an office out of Surrey, told our hereditary chief that they would phone us before anybody came out to enforce the injunction. That didn't happen. So it was on Monday, early Monday morning, that we got reports that RCMP were on the move. We called all of our chiefs. They made their way out there. The Aboriginal liaisons met them out there. The sort of what happened. So I wasn't actually out there when this happened, but basically what happened from what I was told by people on the ground is that they allowed only 5 of our hereditary chiefs, so 1 from each clan, to access because the RCMP put their own roadblock up and were denying anybody access to the checkpoint.
And can I just ask you, because I don't understand, so I want to make sure the audience understands. What's the difference between the hereditary chiefs and like a tribal council or tribal chiefs? Is there a difference?
Absolutely. So our hereditary chiefs are part of our traditional governance that we've had since time immemorial. The Wet'suwet'en have had their traditional governance recognized. So the Supreme Court of Canada, through the Delgamuukw case that was decided on in 1997, recognized that the Wet'suwet'en had never had their title extinguished. And it was through our hereditary system that was proven. And because we have never stopped practicing. So even through like potlatch bans where our feasts were outlawed, which was in place for like 100 years, we continued to practice our traditional governance. Not all nations, certainly not all nations in BC, but not all nations in Canada even have an intact traditional governance system. The chief and council or tribal council in the States is a government imposed governance model. And so those are elected officials that report directly to the government of Canada.
I see.
Whereas our hereditary chiefs are ancient names that are passed down through lineage. So we're a matrilineal society, and so we follow. Everyone belongs to the clan that their mother came from, and those names are passed down through family lineage.
Okay.
And so Coastal GasLink has made agreements with, they say, all 20 bands, so tribal council, chief and council, that are along the proposed route. But to my understanding, none of the pipeline doesn't actually go through any reserves. And so chief and council or tribal council only has jurisdiction over what happens within the reserve boundaries. So they're responsible for like plumbing and water and stuff like that, for the members that are living on the reserve. And it has been recognized that the traditional governance, so the hereditary chiefs, have jurisdiction over all of our territory, which is approximately 22,000 square kilometers. So they say they have they have agreements with all those bands, chief and council, but they have never had consent from the hereditary chiefs. And so the hereditary chiefs have always maintained that they will not allow any pipelines in their territory. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's always interesting because in America, you always hear this PR from the fossil fuel companies saying, oh, we've done all this outreach with the tribes and they were on board, but now all of a sudden they're not on board. So I wonder with those 20 tribes you mentioned, how much of that is true and how much of that is wishful desire by TransCanada.
Yeah, and I mean, so Coastal GasLink says that they have, 100 emails and such where, but the way that they phrase it is really tricky. And so it may be true that they have sent emails to the hereditary chief's office, but that does not by any means constitute consultation.
Right.
And it by definitely does not imply consent.
Right.
So, consent is a funny thing, I think. Well, it's not really like their definition of consent. I think is really kind of twisted because, I think of like the most commonly referred to topic around consent, and it's like usually has to do with, relationships. And so if it's not a clear, emphatic yes, it means no.
Right.
And I think that, industry, if they send an email, then to them that's consultation. And there's like implied consent if we're not saying no.
Right.
Which we know is not true, and the courts have certainly proven that through like sexual assault cases, that if a victim doesn't say no, stop, that still doesn't mean that they're giving consent. Whereas the hereditary chiefs have definitely said no.
Right.
Emphatically, no.
And looking at some of the just horrific scenes, it kind of like triggered what I saw because I was at Standing Rock quite a bit covering it. You see natives and water protectors essentially saying "we love you" to the police, which happened at Standing Rock, and then the police basically climb up the barrier and start tackling them down.
Hey, look out! Hey, move! Go back! Young man, go back, young man! Young man, I pray! I pray! Please, young man! Please! Stop! You're hurting them! Stop! Young man, you must! You must! Go! I'm not looking out! I'm coming down! Look out! No! Do not! Stop! On your rest! Get down! Stop! Get out of here!
And arresting them, and the water protectors, I don't know if that's what you guys call them, but they're basically saying you're breaking your own laws.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about some of the scenes? Because it's been very striking. It looks very similar to some of the pipeline demonstrations here in the States.
Definitely. And so, my sister was one of the people that was arrested. And hearing what she had to say about what was going on is that, they repeatedly were telling them that they loved them and that they were doing this for their children and their great-grandchildren and those yet unborn. They were reminding them consistently of whose territory they were on. And they were also singing to them as they were being arrested. And, the firsthand reports that, people shared were really touching. Like, there was RCMP officers who couldn't look them in the eye. And there were people that had tears in their eyes because they knew what they were doing was wrong, and I can just, watching the video and seeing the women singing and hearing people yelling and screaming in pain and the images of people being thrown on the ground, it's like, if there was ever a definition of excessive force or, unwarranted use of force, I think this would definitely fit the bill.
Right. And can you kind of talk about this territory? Because, for example, a lot of, in Standing Rock, not just the water was at risk, but the tribe's way of life, hunting and fishing, things like that. This territory, what is it known for as far as the way of life, customs, and those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, the Unist'ot'en territory is the most pristine territory that we have left. So it's completely untouched. There are the river that the exact spot in the river where the pipeline is proposing to cross is at the headwaters of our salmon spawning river. And so that river brings salmon and life to all the communities going from here all the way to the ocean. So all of those communities would be affected. We have seen declining salmon numbers, drastic declining salmon numbers over the last 10 years. And this would completely wipe them out. There's grizzly bear habitat. There's moose habitat. Up in the mountains behind Unist'ot'en, there are, people have taken helicopter tours. The chiefs have gone out there, and it's not accessible unless you fly in. And, they've seen herds of moose in the back territories, and all of this would be devastated. They want to put in roads, so they want to put in access roads, and the mountains that they're going to be planning on going through. We had a gas pipeline explosion not too far from here just a few months ago in Prince George, and it took hours for people to be able to respond, and this was in a very accessible community. And so if this went through and there was a leak or an explosion in these super remote areas, it would be days, and by then the damage would be irreversible.
Right.
So, and I don't think it's ever a question of if there's going to be a problem, it's a matter of when.
Right. And, in America, I think because President Trump is so outlandish and terrible, people look at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who has spoken tough against Trump and talked, about Trump's immoral, not kind of subtly, sometimes stronger. A lot of people put out memes, he's good looking and these things. So in general, Americans have a decent opinion of the Prime Minister there. But from what I have seen in research on Justin Trudeau, loves fracking and is pretty much in line with the fossil fuel industry. How does he play a part in this pipeline and other pipelines in Canada?
Well, he's approved it. Like you said, he's a huge fan. I think what it comes down to for him is, the bottom line. It comes down to money. And when I think about Justin Trudeau, I know a huge part of his campaign was around reconciliation with Indigenous people. And he's all talk. He's a pretty face, and he says the right words, but he has absolutely no action. And, it's really disgusting, I think. One of the things that I can't stand the most in this world are ingenuine people. And he's definitely at the top of the list of one of the most ingenuine people that I've ever seen.
And obviously in America, there's a straight line. You could see which oil companies, fossil fuel companies are donating to politicians. Canada's rules, I think, are not as open as America as far as legalized bribery. But has Trudeau taken money from some of these companies, done fundraisers? What's your knowledge on his ties to fossil fuel companies?
You know what? There's probably people with a lot more knowledge around that than I have. I just know that what comes out of his mouth isn't what he does. Right. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has ties to fossil fuel industry. That hasn't been something that I've myself looked at.
And people, you mentioned this is 22,000 square kilometers of territory. I've seen other Unist'ot'en say that you only have 10% left, really. I mean, they've taken the majority of the territory, so it's similar. Yeah. And now they're essentially ramming this pipeline, which in America, these pipelines, you hear the talking points, it's for energy independence, but then they just export the oil and export them.
Exactly.
What are they saying this natural gas is going to be used for?
It's going to be exported. Yeah, so they're building a huge LNG terminal in Kitimat, which is on the coast. And again, that is going through very delicate waters as far as our salmon population goes. And all the coastal nations depend on the salmon. You know, it's something that we have depended on. And as Wet'suwet'en, it's a symbiotic relationship. You know, we have made agreements, ancient agreements, to protect them and to protect their habitat. And in return, they give themselves to us to help sustain us. And that's a relationship that I think most like kind of mainstream, like non-Indigenous people don't really understand, but it's something that we take very seriously.
Mm-hmm. And the, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Unist'ot'en, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Camp?
Unist'ot'en
camp is where this checkpoint was. At Standing Rock, at one point there was 10 to 15,000 people there. I'm not saying this is the same thing, but there looks to be a lot of people out there. 14 were arrested on Monday, including your sister. Can you kind of talk about the morale now? Are they getting support from other areas in Canada? What about
absolutely
United States?
Absolutely. So there was International Day of Action on Tuesday, and we had a report of, I can't remember. I think it was like 67 rallies worldwide. There have been ongoing rallies of support all across Canada. Freeways and ports, marine ports being shut down, and people occupying political offices and company offices. And, the support has just been incredible. And of course, I was there when all of the people that were arrested were released. And, over the last few days, they're just so incredibly grateful and humbled by, all the people that are watching and all the people that are showing solidarity and support. And, last night, one of the land defenders heard something on the radio, and they were like, oh, wow, this is a really big deal. People are talking about this, because they've been in jail and they have no idea. They didn't have, access to the media or internet or anything like that. And so, it's been really beautiful to see people coming together, and we want to encourage people to keep coming together and keep the pressure on the government and on industry and funders. And, really the message is that they need to respect Wet'suwet'en rights and title, and, follow their own laws and their own court decisions.
And
because that's not happening.
And in America, they've really tried to essentially criminalize protest. I mean, you see places like Louisiana and North Dakota now increasing fines for pipeline protests. They're charging people with felonies for nothing, really, to try and intimidate people into not protesting. The images of the police look pretty brutal. What are people being charged with that are arrested? Trespassing or worse?
So at the moment, they are just in breach of a court injunction. And so it's a breach against the courts. and they have their first court appearance. So of the 14, there was one person released right away from custody in Houston, and the other 13 were brought to Prince George, where they had to appear before a judge. And so the one person that was released actually has court on Monday in Prince George. And so we're asking folks to go there and support her. And then everyone else has a court date of February 4th, where they are going to set a date for the hearing. And so the Coastal GasLink lawyer had stated that they are looking at gathering evidence from their videos, and they want to be pressing charges that range from obstruction of justice, assaulting a police officer, and a number of other things. I'm sure they'll throw in some mischief, and like they'll go all out with whatever they can get. But so far, I think only one person has had criminal charges, and it was assault of a police officer.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I might as well ask. I'm assuming the pipeline company could have put this, the path could have went somewhere else, not in Unist'ot'en territory. And I'm also assuming that this is not exactly, a wealthy area. Most indigenous areas are impoverished, high level of suicide, whatnot. At least in America, is the area where they're putting the pipeline through, generally speaking, an area of poverty?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in two parts. I'm going to say that definitely the reserves face the same challenges as any other Indigenous community. And as far as the wealth of the community, I would say that the specific territory, because it's not a reserve that they're going through, it's our Yinta, our territory, our traditional lands, are actually quite wealthy. They're wealthy in the stories that they hold, and the history, and the wildlife, and the salmon, and the water. The river that they're planning to go through, you can still drink from. We drink directly from the river. We don't filter it. There's no chemicals. There's no industry that has tainted that water.
Wow. And
it's the most nourishing, mineral-rich water that you could have. I mean, look at all the companies in the world that are, buying up fresh water. And this is completely untouched and drinkable, like just with a cup out of the river. Like, where in the world can you do that? You can do that with Wedzin.
And last question. So obviously with Standing Rock, it was a hashtag and global organizing. There's always people in America, the environmentalists, non-Indigenous, but those who want to support Indigenous, that are looking for a cause and to go freeze their ass off. Are you guys? What are you calling on from other people in Canada and America? Is there anywhere they could go to support or come themselves? How are you guys asking for help?
Yeah, so we have there's a Facebook page for each of the checkpoints. So the Unist'ot'en checkpoint is Unist'ot'en access point on Unist'ot'en territory, and that's our Facebook page. We have documents on there that show exactly how people can support. We have a GoFundMe page with the same name. The Unist'ot'en have a website as well as a Facebook page, and it's just exactly that, Unist'ot'en. And they have similar information in both of those places of how people can support. So there's a legal defense fund for Unist'ot'en, and the Unist'ot'en access point on Unist'ot'en territory, also through their GoFundMe. So originally it was being used for like building supplies and food and that sort of thing. But we will also be using it as a legal fund for the folks that have been arrested and any future charges that come out of that. also to support the people that came out to support us, and we will, we're also really supporting our Unist'ot'en nation members that are still there. They have the healing center that is still running on their territory, the Unist'ot'en Healing Camp. And so we're going to be supporting them as much as possible as well.
And I'll just end with a point. Would love to know your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, but whether it's North Dakota or British Columbia, I mean, two countries, but same greed,
Yeah.
same gross negligence for the land. I mean, you see climate change reports. You have 10 years, 12 years until irreversible damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, in both countries and in other countries, you essentially have leaders who talk a good game. I mean, Justin Trudeau has criticized America from pulling back from the Paris Accords, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially just selling out the cleanest water, which you just described, for
Mm-hmm.
profit and greed. Your thoughts on the similarities?
Yeah, I think it's almost easier to have somebody like Trump, and you know exactly where they stand. There's no filter on that mouth, than it is. And I think that's like one of the major differences between US and Canada historically is that, people have often thought, I've traveled abroad and people always think that the Indigenous people are treated very well in Canada and that the relationship is really good with the government. Whereas it's very public, the genocide that was enacted upon like the Indigenous people in the US. And it's not so obvious with Canada. And I think Justin Trudeau and Trump are really sort of, they're very representative of the history of those countries.
Mm.
But they're very much the same. They're doing the same thing, just Justin Trudeau's and Canada actually puts a pretty face on it. They sort of whitewash their history to make it seem like everybody's getting along. And, we have Thanksgiving where like the natives and the settlers and the colonizers were, helping each other out. And while that may be partially true, there was also like really devastating things going on. And, genocide happened here too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. Let your sister know.
You bet.
Love to talk to her too, get a bird's eye view. And
You bet.
stay in touch so I could report to the audience what's going on there.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay. Take care.